Hello, welcome to week 8. This week, our learning topic is managing employees. But before we get into that, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I've been getting a couple questions about grades. Um, Blended class, you should have your assignments graded other than the one you turned in last night. Online class, you guys are my priority to get graded this week, and I'll be grading your compensation assignments this week as well. If you're seeing blanks on your rubric, but you see grades for your discussions, know that yes, I have seen them. You only need to worry about I didn't see a discussion if you have a 0 on your rubric and it says no submission. Um, Honestly, I grade the discussions in Blackboard and then I grade your assignments on those rubric and then I smush them together in week 10. Sometimes I'll put them in there as I'm going if I have time. But yeah, you only need to worry that I didn't see your discussion if you have a 0 on your rubric, at which point you just email me. I go into Blackboard and I can see it all. The other thing for housekeeping, you guys have turned in your compensation assignment, and I did click through a couple of them, and they look pretty good. I also know that you turned in your company choice Thursday at noon, and I will be approving those as soon as I submit this video. So go and look today to make sure that your person in your company for your interview was approved, and if not, just reach out to me if you don't understand the reasons why I said they weren't approved. Okay, I think that's all of my housekeeping. So this week, managing employees, it's probably the part that you'll spend most of your time doing because most employees don't work in human resources. They work with human resources as the hiring manager or part of an interview team or something like that. So we're going to talk about managing employees, disciplining employees, developing our employees. I'm going to touch a little bit on performance appraisals, but that's really the topic for next week, along with larger developmental programs and instead of just individual training. So let's go ahead and get into the content. So, managing employees, the dark side. It is the least favorite part of almost everyone I know. It's the reason that we're afraid of going to HR. When you hear, hey, I need you to go to HR today, it sort of feels like the principal's office, and we don't really like that. But we typically only go to human resources when there's a problem. So we're going to talk about the do's and don'ts of discipline. All right. First, let's use some vocabulary words. Separations. When an employee ceases to be a member of an organization. So this can be voluntary, they quit. It can be involuntary, they were fired or laid off. We care about this because of the cost that you can see, and sometimes we care because our turnover rate isn't matching industry standards. So as an example, retail and food services have really high turnover rates because they're just transitory by nature. We hire students, which, oh, I have a lot of classes or my sport is starting, so they start and quit and all that sort of thing. And then we have jobs where people have been there 10, 15 years, which are going to be more of your blue collar, white collar workers, not retail and fast food workers. So you can actually look up and see what the turnover rate is for your profession, for your industry, for the area, and you can get an idea if your company is good or bad. So there's the idea that we want to keep everybody all the time, and that's just not true. It's just it's unfeasible because we can't keep everybody because there's going to become a time where they want to retire and that is a voluntary separation. We also want to bring new blood into the organization every so often. If we have the same people that have been with us for 15 years, what are we missing that students today are learning in college that we don't even know are things because we've just been doing it this way for 15 years? It's working for us, we're still profitable. So we do want some turnover in the organization, but you don't want too much where nobody knows what's going on because everybody's been hired within the last, year. The costs that come with separations are, well, we have to pay for recruiting. So remember a couple weeks ago when we were talking about recruiting, you guys talked about Indeed or recruiters or third party. All of those things cost money. It costs to put the ad up most places, and you pay by word count or by subscription models, but there are costs. then once you get hired, we have to train you how to do the job. But plus, there's that learning curve. When you start a job and you know what it is because you've had a similar job in another organization, but you have to figure out where everything is, and you just have this really steep learning curve. So while you're learning it, you're really not very productive. You're really not very efficient, and we have to understand that the work still needs to get done. So we try to train you fast, and we also know that we're losing costs just from you not being that efficient yet. And then there are the costs of separation. So depending on the state, we might have to pay your unemployment if we fire you. Depending on why you were let go, we might have severance package issues. We might need, if you quit, we might need to pay out your vacation if we have that kind of policy written. So there might be cost. Plus, if we lose people that were fired badly, sometimes we need to rekey the building, which would be another cost as well, or recode it. A lot of companies have codes and access cards, and when they need to change those sorts of things. All right. Oh, I already talked about this. This is just for your records of voluntary, involuntary, that sort of thing. I really should have looked at this slideshow before I started talking. These are all the reasons that we would want a separation. It really is an opportunity for greater diversity, which is the one thing I didn't talk about. And the third bullet, separated employee may find more rewarding work elsewhere. So this is one that sounds very justifying what we just did, but I have fired people and run into them later and they're like, you know what, you were right. This just wasn't a good fit for me. And now I'm at this other organization and I fit really well. I get along. I'm really successful. And if you wouldn't have fired me, I probably would have stayed there forever because I was too scared to do anything else. And in the moment, it doesn't feel true, but it can be true. I really have seen it. And sometimes bullet number 4, we just need to cut payroll. It's not anything they did. We just need to lower our overhead. It happens. All right, so we are looking at disciplining an employee. What rights do the employees have? Well, we can't fire them because of discrimination. Because you're a woman, because you're this demographic or that demographic. We have to make sure that they have safe working conditions. So if you're telling an employee to go up a moldy, rickety ladder and they're like, that's not safe, they can say, that's not safe, I'm not going to do it. And we need to investigate the safety claim before we investigate discrimination or discipline claims. So we do need to make sure that we're not doing any kind of retaliation. Employees also have the right to unionize. Some companies are very anti-union, Walmart being one of them. They will close their store before they let the workers unionize. They do have the right to do it, but the company has the right to not do business in that state anymore, which Boeing was a big lawsuit a couple years ago. They moved some of their factories from Washington State, where they had heavy unions in Seattle, to South Carolina, where there were no unions. And they cut their overhead by 25%, and the union sued them. They were breaking the law. And the government said, no, the company has a right to close a location and open another location for business purposes. It was not discrimination, it was costs. If you have a contract with your employees, you have to honor it. So as an example, I have a 3-year contract. So if for some reason MSOE needed to let me go for overhead reasons, they would need to pay me some version of my contract, and I'd have to look at the details of it to know for sure. Same thing with union contracts. Unions discipline is a much different process than non-union discipline. So you need to know what those criteria are and follow them. And then honestly, this is the biggest one. I have a lot of friends that, oh, you work in HR. Is this illegal? Most things are not illegal. The statutory things, you can see those are the only 3 things that are covered by law everywhere. Most everything else is employee policy, employee handbook. You have stated in your handbook that this is the policy. You have to abide by that policy. So if we tell you that for your discipline, you're going to get a verbal warning, written warning, fired, and we have no wiggle room, we don't say, depending on severity, we might escalate it, right? So if you are just being disrespectful to your coworkers, maybe that's a verbal warning. If you come in waving a baseball bat at your coworkers, maybe that goes straight to termination. You need to have that language in your handbook. Whenever there's vagueness or the exact opposite, they put in a million scenarios, but not specifically this one. So now can we actually discipline on this one? So I always counsel to small companies, do not give examples of what you're talking about stated in the handbook. You talk through kinds of things, because if you say these are the things that are unprofessional and then an employee does something that never occurred to you, for example, I had an employee through one of my companies that I was consulting for, got a bad performance review and went and defecated in the stairwell. It was not written anywhere in the handbook that he wasn't allowed to do that. So was he allowed to have sanctions put on him because it wasn't listed in their 37-page handbook? Yeah, we were allowed to punish him. That was unprofessional. Everyone agreed. But employee handbook is really the place where companies get in trouble. All right, other ones. You have to treat them ethical. You have some requirement to guarantee their privacy, and they have some free speech options. So obviously, free speech is protected by the Constitution. You're right. You can't go to jail for free speech, but I can fire you for free speech issues. So if you work for MSOE and then you go on the news talking about how MSOE is a private college and we're ripping people off because of our high tuition, why would I not fire you for that? Yeah, you can't go to jail because we have a lot of people. It's the First Amendment. I'm allowed to say whatever I want. You're right. I'm not trying to send you to jail. I just don't like what you said about the company you work for. So you'll see some of those sorts of things. You'll also see if you're speaking on behalf of the company, you're not allowed to talk about any of these things. And you'll see that in different handbooks again. So at my previous employer, we were not allowed to talk about to the media about anything, even as private citizens, and we signed that in our contract. Nothing. If the media wants to talk to you about you volunteering at your kid's school, the answer is no. And they did that because they had so many employees that would just talk to the media, and then it got spun and it was about them, and it was a whole big thing. So you will see sometimes people post things on Facebook and then they get fired for it. That's why. It is only protected that you won't have criminal things. You're not protected at work. So management has all the other rights, which aren't a lot. We have the right to run the business and retain any profits earned. We don't necessarily have to give back to our employees. We have the right to hire, manage, promote, discipline, and discharge employees in a legally and ethically compliant manner. And then we have the residual rights, whatever's left over. Okay, employment at will, common law that allows employers to discharge employees at any time for any cause. So depending on the state you live in, it's in Wisconsin now, we have that here. Most states do. And the idea is if you can quit your job at any time, why can't I fire you at any time if you're doing things that aren't business appropriate? So the public policy based, your legislation decides if you're a right to work state, employment at will state, same kind of verbiage. You have to have the understanding of implied contracts. So if I hire you and you don't have a contract, but I tell you you're going to work 40 hours a week through this whole entire project and the project lasts 3 years, that's an implied contract. You might not sign anything because it's just not common for the industry, but this happens a lot, especially like in construction work. You're hired for full time until the project is over. So if you let them go when the project's only half done, you might have lawsuits in there. And then the third one is lack of good faith and fair dealing. This is a common sense kind of check. You told me that you were hiring me to be a professor, and all I do is tutor. This isn't what you told me it was. So it just feels like it was a bait and switch kind of thing. And those are usually prosecuted in a civil court where the judge uses their, I want to say common sense, but it's a little more strict than that. But it's just to keep companies from just firing anybody for any reason. Okay. The 5 big balancing areas for HR. These are the 5 things that if we're going to get sued, and it's not because we have a bad handbook, which is sadly one of our big things, These are the areas that we get in trouble for disciplining employees the most often. A random drug test. I saw a picture on Facebook yesterday, and there was a random drug test jar sitting on someone's desk who had just got back from Burning Man. And if you're not familiar with that, it's like a big festival where they burn big sculptures, and evidently there's a lot of drugs there. So was it really a random drug test if they knew that he was on vacation to Burning Man? Um, it depends what your random drug testing policy is. If I can have targeted drug testing, um, so I have cause to believe that drugs have been consumed by you, or you're still under the effects. You have slurred speech. You went to the Burning Man concert. You called in sick for April 20th, and we're making a lot of marijuana references because the 420 holiday. Yeah, I might test you the day after, but I have to have targeted drug testing written into my policies. We do this a lot in manufacturing because we want to reserve the right to, if we notice somebody's, slurring their speech or stumbling or acting off, that we can target them. If it's not truly random, where just you have software that's running in the background that just pops up and says Trina needs a drug screen today, um, and then maybe you go 3 days and 4 people pop up in the system, there's a lot of softwares like that. So you just need to make sure that it is clear and written out somewhere so employees are aware. This is actually causing a lot of issues in the states where marijuana is legal, and there's no thing like with alcohol. Like maybe you drank yesterday because it was Sunday, and you come to work and you drink so much that you're still blowing like a 0.01 on the breathalyzer, which is the equivalent of half a drink. We know that you're sober. There are no levels like that for THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana. So we don't know if you smoked on the way in and are stoned, or if you smoked yesterday and there's just still some in your system. So they're trying to figure that all out right now in those states where it's legally allowed. There's also electronic monitoring. We talked about privacy and safety week 4 maybe. You need to tell your employees what's being monitored and how, and let them know, like, if we have cause, we might do these extra things, but you just need to, again, make it clear so they can't say, I didn't know, you're violating my privacy. If somebody has whistleblowing, so they see something happening at work and they think it's illegal or unethical, what is your policy on how they report it and who they should report it to, and make sure that you don't have retaliation in there. So you'll have people that'll say, I think this policy is unethical, and they report it to their manager, they report it to human resources, and both the manager and human resources are like, I don't think that's unethical, and they go to Fox 6 News. You need to have something in your policy about who and what the reporting policy is for whistleblowing, and a no retaliation policy, because you are not allowed to retaliate against whistleblowing. There's actually a couple of laws about it now. 4, moonlighting, a second job in a related field. So as a professor at MSOE, I have to sign a form competing, it's not a non-compete clause, but it's like, what else are you doing that you earn money from or spend time with? So if I wanted to teach a second class at Cardinal Stritch or something, I'm actually not allowed to do that because I have a contract here. So if your company doesn't want you to also be an engineer at another company at night or be trying to do your own startup, they need to have it clear. Now, the fact that I also get paid to do leadership speeches, or I get paid to run the summer programs, I tell them about that and they decide yes or no if that counts. So if you're working full time as an engineer and then you get a second job at McDonald's on the weekends for spending money or to help cover your bills or whatever, does your company need to know? Do they have policies against it? That sort of thing. All right, last but not least, office romance. Some companies just have a blatant, you're not allowed to date anyone in the office ever. Don't do it, don't ask. And the reason is sexual harassment. So you and your significant other that met at the cubicles are now in love and lovey-dovey, and you're standing at the copier like holding hands and I love you more, and you're making all of the rest of us gag every time you do it. We can file claims against the company for sexual harassment because you're offending us. Or you guys break up, there's no longer love bubbles, and you start sabotaging the other person. We don't want to deal with any of this, so we'll put policies in place. Or the other way is we have you sign a form when we find out that you're dating, and we put language in the handbook that if you start dating another employee, you need to notify us within 2 weeks of being in a relationship, and we will define it to physical intimacy. We define it pretty clearly, so you can't be like, oh, well, we're not dating, we're just go down that tangent. We're not even going to go there. And then we say you understand that you cannot sue the company for any sexual harassment related to this person because you willingly engaged in relationship with them. So that we just kind of say you can't get mad at us if they turn into an ex that you don't want to talk to. All right. So we need to make sure we have policies and procedures and our managers know what they are and they're clearly explained. Here are the reasons that we tend to want to discipline our employees. They don't show up to work, or they show up late, or they leave early. They're not very good at their job. They just, for whatever reason, poor customer service, poor quality, insubordination. It's pretty much just back talking and being rude to your manager, and it's a consistent thing, not like a one time you snap at them or something. And maybe it is. I've seen employees get written up for just a one time, they lost their temper. Workplace bullying is, everyone starts picking on Janet about all the cat pictures in her cubicle, and Janet starts feeling like she has a hostile workforce. This is harassment, and we fall into harassment laws, so we want to lock that down. And we'll again define what it is, and usually verbal warning, written warning, termination, unless it's we reserve the right to fire you on first offense if it's very severe kind of language. Alcohol-related misconduct, illegal drug use, and abuse. So showing up work drunk or stoned, we usually are going to discipline you. So how do we do it? Well, there's an expectation of privacy. Not to say that you can't talk about what happened, but why are you talking about what happened? So if Bob crashes the forklift in front of everyone because he's drunk, you can't really keep that private because people are going to talk about it, and people are going to talk when people get disciplined or discharged. The idea is you do it in private. You go and have a meeting in an office, in the break room, away from the group. Fair and just discipline. Somebody's 5 minutes late to work after 7 years of never having a sick day, never missing anything, and you fire them. That's not fair and just. It doesn't go with. It's just not equal punishment for the crime, if you will. Consistency, you cannot treat Janet differently than you treat Bob just because of whatever. You need to be consistent when and who gets disciplined. So if no one else gets written up for being 5 minutes late and you write up Bob for being 5 minutes late, you're going to have an issue on your hands. Reasonable punishment for violations, it's the same as the fair and the just. Documentation. So this is the one place where companies really, really don't do well. They have no documentation whatsoever. So they're trying to say, this has been happening, this has been happening. We're like, and the employee says, where's your paperwork? Where's your proof? And they're like, you were there. You don't want to get into a he said, she said. You write down everything. You put it in your employee management system software. You write it down on Post-it notes. It doesn't matter. Just have proof because the company has to prove it. The employee just has to claim that it didn't happen. So you need to show proof. A progressive system is usually a best practice. Verbal warning, written warning, suspension, which is exactly what it sounds like. We send you home with no pay for 2 or 3 days to see if you really want to work here, and they come back with a new attitude, or they come back and we fire them a couple weeks later. Again, if you have a union situation, you might not be able to do these things in that order. All right, so firing somebody is usually because of something they did. It's individual. Layoffs are departmental. We have too many costs. We need to do something. So if we have to do a layoff, meaning it's not anything they did, it's a business necessity, The first option is an early retirement option. It's a really good one. So maybe people are only, 61 and we offer to give them a lump sum to retire early. You have to make sure that you do not allude to potential future layoffs, and you do not, you can't make it forced. You can't make them retire if they don't want to. Um, Sometimes they're not related to layoffs. Sometimes we just want to get younger workers in, and we know that they're thinking about retiring in a year or two, and we just don't want to have that delay of the new innovation. Again, you need to be careful with discrimination charges here. Um, you really need to be careful. This is when you're going to want to bring in an employment law lawyer and make sure that everything you're doing is completely and totally above par. My stepdad actually took an early retirement option from Weyerhaeuser, and it was a year and a half of salary and continued benefits through when he would have turned 65, which was the year and a half. And it was worth it to Weyerhaeuser to pay him that in a lump sum, um, because they just didn't need that kind of role anymore. But they did, but they didn't. So they laid him off and then told him, but they might call him in to help train the younger workers as they were needed. So he was actually really excited to retire early and jumped on the package really fast. Alternatives to layoffs. We usually don't want to lay off people because we usually lose a lot of really good people in our layoffs. So we can try these things first. Honestly, we did a lot of these during the recession. We were trying not to do layoffs. Um, I've seen the pay freeze. I've seen the whole company take a 5% pay cut, so nobody got laid off. That was a really interesting one. It was a vote, and if more than 5% of the people said no, then it wouldn't happen, and they would just start laying people off. But yeah, you can look at all these sorts of things. None of these are really ideal. Honestly, when you're in this position, it's just what's the least heinous option you can come up with. All right, you have to do it. You've tried everything else, it's not working. Decide which jobs will be subject to a layoff based on business needs. So you look and you see what's capacity, where are we at, which departments are critical. You don't ever want to cut sales, because if you cut sales, you cut revenue. And then you're just chopping your arm off, and it's worse and spirals, and it's horrible. You develop criteria, which can be seniority or performance based. You notify workers. If you have more than 50 workers being laid off in a location, you have to give them 60 days notice. You want to communicate it in person where possible. You want to make sure the media is alerted, because you don't want it to get out and act like you're doing something shady. Maintaining security. People get very upset when they get laid off and fired. So you're going to want to have more security, because they tend to take it out on the company in terms of stealing, destruction of property, fights. It's really bad. And then this last one, surviving, reassuring the survivors of the layoff. There's a lot of survivor guilt. All your friends were laid off. Why were you chosen? You have a lot of guilt, and your productivity is really horrible after a layoff. I have been on the HR side laying off people. I've been an employee when half of the team was laid off, and it was horrible. That is all we have for disciplining employees. So for career development, which is the happier side, we want to talk about the happier side. So we're keeping all these employees. We're not having all these horrible discipline issues. Our people are great. We're going to keep them forever. We're going to train them. We're going to end on a positive note. I thought about starting here and then doing discipline, and I was like, ooh, I don't want to end on a sad note on a Monday. So we did the sad stuff. Now we're going to do the happy stuff. I talked about that learning curve earlier. TP Wright developed it. It's really interesting. If you're that kind of a nerd like I am, you can look it up, and it talks about how you can know how long and how deep the learning curve would be depending on the job. You need to have somebody who knows how to teach people, design your training. A lot of times the hiring manager is just training people. And as you guys may or may not be aware, just because you know the topic doesn't mean you can teach the topic. So we want to make sure that we are, in fact, teaching in a way that's productive. And we are teaching what's actually needed, which is that third one, a needs assessment. So many, many, many times I was asked to do a training on written communication. My team is just, I'm sending emails and they're sending replies back, and then stuff's still getting missed. I think we just need to be better trained on how to share information cleanly and clearly and make sure everyone knows and we're on the same page, which sounds like a legitimate training need. And then you go into the team and you find out they know how to write emails. I mean, half of them are college educated. They know what needed to be done. What is a problem is they don't like each other. They don't have trust. They don't have any engagement to each other. And that's why the work isn't getting done. So you need to do a team building and trust building exercise, not a writing exercise. So they're just ignoring all the emails from Gary because they think Gary's a moron and they're not going to do anything he asks. That's actually the need. So the learning and development department needs to make sure that what they're actually training on is the root cause and not just a symptom that we're addressing. Some trends in training and development, gamification. If you guys have seen all those badges and levels, and a lot of softwares have it these days. I've seen in people's signatures that they're OSHA certified, and there's like a medallion next to their name where you can click on it and it'll bring you into all the details of badges, online badges. Just in time training. So we don't have a whole big shelf of training that's just ready for you, and we just pull it out and we deliver the same training we developed in 1984. You come to us, you ask us, we do a needs assessment, and we develop it for your specific team and develop it and train it just when it's needed, very much like your continuous improvement just-in-time models. Knowledge sharing forums. So maybe you only have 2 training specialists in your whole entire company of 1,000 people, and their backlog is 3 or 4 months. Why not just have some way where your employees can talk to each other? So as an example, Salesforce, which is a huge customer resource management platform, has this thing inside of it. Chatter is what they call it, and it's kind of like a Facebook-ish feed. Maybe it's a forum. And hopefully you guys know what an online forum is. I'm not going to get into the details, but I can type in, hey, does anyone know where we find the OSHA codes for how to deal with these solutions? And then somebody else who does the same thing as you in Detroit is like, yeah, it's on the shared drive. You go into the O folder, C drive, and you have knowledge being shared, and the training and development people didn't have to go find the answer because that's not part of their job, and then deliver it to you, and you have this really long lag. So that's actually really helpful. You just need to make sure that you have somebody monitoring it, so the guy in Detroit isn't just messing with the people here in Milwaukee and sending them on a goose chase that's going to take them forever. And then you also want the trend of lifelong learners. You want your employees to just be interested in their job and want to learn more about it. They want to go to this conference, they want to go to this seminar, they want to take this class and just learn more about their field. So you want that internal motivation to have training and development. All right, your corporate training, 70% of it should be on the job. So if you think about how you've learned most of the things in your job, so if you just take a second and think through, how did I learn this process, that process, where this is? It's usually like popping your head into your neighbor's cubicle or space and saying, hey, I don't know how to, on the printer, do a collation and staple so it's all bound together. Can you show me how to do that real quick? That's on the job training. It can be formal, like an apprenticeship, where you're a young whippersnapper and you want to learn something, and you go to the journeyman and he takes you on as his apprentice, and you work through it until you are also a journeyman or master level carpenter, or a lot of the trades crafts have these. Some countries actually have these even for white collar work, and it's really interesting because some people really just learn by doing, and 70% should be doing it. Formal learning, what you guys are doing now, classroom, seminars, conference, should only be 10% because honestly, it's the least successful. I mean, this video right now, I don't even know how many minutes we're into it, but you guys are only going to remember maybe 10% of it, maybe. So it's just not very effective, but it is efficient. So sometimes we trade off efficiency for effectiveness. And then the last one is social learning. You have a one-on-one with your manager and they say, well, have you tried using this software instead of that software? It might be faster for your processing. And it's almost like on the job training, but it's more of a coaching model than just popping your head in somebody's office. So it might be targeted coaching as well. So your manager is coaching you specifically on software use and your leadership skills, and they're directing that through Okay, here's the last thing we're going to talk about. When we do formal education, Donald Kirkpatrick of University of Wisconsin came up with this a long time ago, like 30 years ago. And he said, well, trainers do a good job training, but how do they convey what they trained? So he came up with these 4 models. Level 1, the lowest level that you should do for any training is reaction. So if you think about the end of course surveys that you guys get emailed to you, how do you feel about the training? And if you went to corporate training, you've probably had those little scorecards. Did this training meet your expectations? Somewhat, a little bit, yes, strongly agree, those Likert models that we've all seen. And was there any expectations that weren't met? And all they're doing is your reaction. Was it what you expected? How does the flow? Did you learn something? But they're not actually testing your learning, which is level 2. In learning, we usually do a pre-test and a post-test, or we give you tests or papers like we do here in school. So at work, I was in charge of training on Office a million years ago. So we gave them a little online quiz, and it was like, reformat a Word document, build a formula in Excel. And they had a pre-test, and then we ran them through the 2-day training, and then we gave them a test at the end, and we were measuring how much they had learned. So that's a learning effectiveness level. The third one is behavior. We're training you on something to change your behavior. So maybe we bring in our new supervisors and we run them through the Carnegie time management program, where it teaches you how to block your time and color code your calendar and just be really effective with your time. So we come visit you again in 3 months or 6 months or a year or all of them, depending on what the company was training you on and what the behavior is. And we talk to you, we talk to your manager, we talk to your team, depending on, again, what we're training on. And did your behavior change? The last one, results. This is business results, not trainer results, MSOE results. Did our training change the way the company did their business? So as an example, a company that I am familiar with did a training where every single employee ran through a continuous improvement 3-hour seminar. And then they did a project with their work team, and then they did another 3-hour seminar. And it was all about ways to just continuously improve your workspace. And they showed at the end of a full fiscal year that they had improved their profitability by 15% through continuous improvement initiatives. That's amazing. Level 4 results are really, really hard to attain because we have so many confounding variables. Well, I trained you on how to use the MSOE library. So now everyone that visits the library is because I did a 1-hour training for 25 people. No, probably not. It's just coincidence, probably. So it's really hard to show level 4 results with any kind of clarity because there's so many confounding variables. So if you've taken statistics, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, just know it's hard because we can't prove it necessarily. You really want me to update my software. Okay. Okay, so let's see what our assignments are this week. There's a lot of reading this week. Some of this reading is actually for next week. This all used to be together. Week 8 and 9, all of it was together. So I'm just going to close my email. So I've split it out. So you only need to read the ones that like employee development, discipline and firing, and that sort of thing. You can leave the appraisal effectiveness and appraisal perceptions for your week 9 reading. You have 3 discussion questions this week. You have discipline, developmental models, and preconceived notions. I want to make sure that you guys know that there are 2 threads that have very, very similar names. You want to do development models this week. Developmental programs is next week. So models this week, programs next week. So you're going to go through these 3 discussions this week. All due Thursday by noon. You do not have an actual assignment due, just the discussions. You see, though, that on your preconceived notions, you do need to reply to 2 classmates. So you're going to do a 5-post week. That's all I have. I know this was a little bit of a longer video, but it's a lot of content. So if you have any questions, email me, phone. I'll be around most of this week. And good luck. I look forward to talking with you in the discussions. Thank you.